Good morning, Bob. Thank you for joining us to tell us a little bit about how music and faith have just come together to make a very rich and beautiful life for you. This is Bob Smith that we're interviewing today. Uh, Bob is part of our spiritual enrichment ministry, and today's recording is being made on August 31st, 2020. Bob, let's begin by telling us a little bit about your background in faith and also the town you came from in Pennsylvania and college, and then meeting your wonderful wife, Jan.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Um, yeah, I was born in a small town with a small college in Western Pennsylvania, an area of the country for where at that time people stayed. They were born there, they lived there, they died there. Um, Obviously, I'm of the generation that left, as are a few other members of our congregation. The college in that town was where my parents had met. They were both at that time the first in their family to go to college. Um, they met, they married, they liked the town, and so as they began to grow a family, they bought a lot and built a house. And other than the early years of World War II, when we were kind of camp followers for most of the war, we moved back there, and that's where I grew up. Music. But first started in music with probably age 6 or 7, and with John Thompson's Teaching Little Fingers to Play, which has probably been on a lot of pianos benches and in pianists throughout the history of many people. My problem, I learned to read the music very well, but I never could get both hands to work together at the same time. And so when another opportunity came along, when I was about 10, my school, which was a K-12 school, decided to have its first band. And so there were high school students, middle school students, and my brother, who was then 7, played the trumpet, and I think he was the youngest in that band. And we played, and that's where music really began for me. It was a lot of fun. It was something everybody could do together, and it didn't really matter your age, it's just your enthusiasm and how well you could learn to play your instrument. Much to my surprise, even though I expected to go to that college in my hometown, just as my folks had, when I got to early in my senior year of high school, my mother said to me, "You really should go away to school." And Professor such and such, who used to live up the block, is now teaching in another school in the Midwest, and let me send to him for applications. And she did, and sure enough, applications arrived. I completed them, sent them out, and lo and behold, I got admitted to Northwestern University in Evanston. Not only did I get admitted, I got a scholarship for my freshman year. So I got launched out of my community. When I got there, lo and behold, they had a marching band. Now, my school was too small for football at the time, so I never marched anywhere but in a street on a Halloween parade or something like that. And so I played an audition, and it wasn't the greatest audition in the world. But when I got done, I had to admit to John Painter, the director of the band, I said, "Mr. Painter, my school had no football. I've never marched on a football field." And he looked at me and said, "Don't worry, Bob, we'll teach you." And they did. It was great. In 2, 3 years that I was in that band, we played in every Big Ten stadium in the conference, and we got out and we traveled and we played together. It's always a community, it's the community of the interested and the enthusiastic. And it was an all-male band in those days.
Oh,
Yes, which is not anymore. Times have changed, and the band did too. Um, so,
hey, Bob, can we return to a couple things in your growing up?
sure.
You mentioned that singing, like just group singing, like at home, was
Yes,
part of the routine.
yes. My dad sang in college as a a band singer locally on the campus and sang in a group. And one of the first musical instruments in our house from very early on was a piano. My dad would play chords in rhythm and sing, and we would all sing. And I don't know, from the time I was 7 or 8 years old, that was just a part of music. It was part of an event that went on in your household. Unfortunately, my dad died at 14 quite suddenly in a single car accident, and it was a tough time. The community steps up and helps raise you. My mother deserves almost all the credit, but the whole town makes you feel that way. That went on. Anyway, I did not finish at Northwestern. I dropped out at some point and came back and did a hitch, active duty hitch in the Army, and came out, got a job at the local college, and one day in walked a gentleman who was wearing a Northwestern athletic jacket. And we talked, and it turned out he was a new faculty member, and he was about to teach a slate of classes. And I said, what are you teaching this semester? And he told me, and I said, is there any way I could audit that class? I'd really like to get back in it because I wanted to get back and finish school. And so he said, sure. And I went to the class on the first day, and there were 5 students. I was one of them. My wife to be was one of the 5 as well. And things just worked out after that.
What
So
college was that, Bob?
the college is Westminster College, which was a United Presbyterian college at the time. This was when there were UPs and Presbyterians and United Presbyterians. And my comment to people who think that's kind of odd, I said, well, the Presbyterians would drink publicly and the UPs drank privately. I'm not sure that that's really true. So there was, and this was a school that took great pride in having a Bible department at religious education, and turned out people who went on to become, most of them, Presbyterian ministers.
And where was Westminster, or where is Westminster?
New Wilmington, Pennsylvania, about 60 miles north of Pittsburgh. One of the things that I did also learn, your family always is, at least for me, was a prime teacher in life lessons. And that was that we could always find somebody who could quote scripture and give us their opinion of exactly what that meant. But whether they were ministers or professors or whatever, you learned that their explanation was their explanation, and you pretty much had to work on getting your own after a while. And that some stuff was just a little too fundamental. Anyway, that certainly began a religious background, and we belong. The town of 2,000 people had 4 Protestant churches, and 2 of them were Presbyterian. So how single-tracked a lot of our lives were. It made life a lot simpler. This was a town where nothing opened on Sunday, but those were in the days when Pennsylvania had blue laws, and nothing could start that would interrupt church or the evening service, which is why no inning of professional baseball could start after 6 p.m. at night.
Wow.
A whole other set of stories, but we would go on to.
So you and Jan married, and then
Yes.
you made a couple stops before you made it to Chicago.
Yes. We married. I took a job with Ford in Detroit. Jan got a teaching job in the Detroit area, and we moved to Detroit, and we were there for 7 years. I spent 5.5 years with Ford, and then a couple more years with an automotive supplier, Eaton. And decided it was time to move on and look for other opportunities. And so I took a job with a company in Milwaukee, and we picked up, at that point, we had 1 child who had been born in Royal Oak, Michigan. Um, and we moved to Brookfield, a suburb of Milwaukee, and I went to work for a company that built electric motors. Um, but we never treated Wisconsin as though it was going to be where we were going to spend the rest of our lives. We liked it, but for some reason, we just knew that, and so we always lived as though we were tourists, and we should go to see what there was to see in Wisconsin while you could see it. And that worked out very well. We got to see, we drove all over the state, and I was also working as a purchasing manager in a company, and many of our suppliers were in Wisconsin. So I was in a lot of businesses in a lot of towns. Good experience, good time.
And what was it in Milwaukee area that you had your first encounter experience with barbershop four part?
Yes, yes. I'd been an instrumental musician. I'd sung, but I'd been an instrumental musician when somehow after I'd spent a year or two in Wisconsin, I got an opportunity and took it and signed up with a 40-man barbershop chorus in Waukesha, which is nearby. And I sang there for 2 years and loved it. It's group singing at its best, and the good chapters help you learn how to be a better singer. It was a very positive outlook and all of that. So we then moved on. Chicago called, and which was great because Milwaukee didn't show up on Jan's mother's weather maps. And so she never was quite sure where we lived. But when we moved to Chicago, that was always on the weather map if you lived in New Jersey. So we hunted around the North Shore and really thinking, I was working in Evanston, I'm thinking that Evanston's probably where we wanted to live. But I think we looked at over 100 homes in about a 6-week time period. And I think we only looked at 2 in Winnetka, and 1 fit our pocketbook, and we bought the house on Scott Avenue and moved in, and then immediately had buyer's remorse. Here we were in an old house, and if you put a marble on the floor, it would run from room to room because nothing was flat. And I remember going down the street and meeting the first family that we met there, who were in the process of selling their house and moving to the East Coast, and said, "Where have we moved?" And the guy said, "Oh, you've moved to a great place." He said, "Moving here is like joining the country club, and the price of admission was your house. You're going to like it here." He was right. We stayed 45 years.
Yeah.
Our second child, while he was born in Milwaukee, when we moved, they were 6 and 2. Great place to live. I could go on about that for the rest of it, but I better move along.
Yeah, church-wise, you had been a Presbyterian. What did you do?
That's right. When we got to Winnetka, they were between ministers at the Presbyterian Church, and so we sort of languished for a little bit until a guy who moved in around the corner from us, who moved in about the same time, came and said, "Hey, Christ Church has a men and boys choir and a guy who really can teach little boys to sing." And so at about age 7 or 8, Brian and I joined the choir at Christ Church, as did our friends. And this is an interesting choir. The men were volunteers. The little boys got paid. The little boys got paid a dime a rehearsal. And which, you think, hey, but when you're 9 years old and you come home and shake out a little pay envelope and there's $2.50 in there, you are king of the hill because you have an income. And that was great. And we stayed with that until Brian's voice changed at age 14 or so, 13, 14. And the choir director, Marlon Allen, who really could teach little boys to sing really well. Miss Wright came walking down the aisle one day, and Marlon got married, and within a year he was gone from that church, and was replaced by another choir director who unfortunately was not up to Marlin standards. And my younger one had joined up at that point and came home one day and said, we all got fined today. There was a pause. And then he said, I don't think I did anything wrong and I shouldn't have been fined. I don't want to sing there anymore. And I thought, I can make him go back. But if I do, he'll probably hate singing. And I'm not willing to pay that price. So we went looking for churches again. The Presbyterians, once again, were between pastors. And somehow somebody suggested, well, what about WCC? And we went, and lo and behold, probably we knew 25 to 30% of the current members of that church because we'd lived in the community long enough. It was like coming home. So kids got involved in youth groups, and we got involved in the church. And that was great. I joined the choir. I tried to talk Randy Mangus, who was the choir director at that point, into joining a barbershop group because one of the members of WCC was Steve Holtz, and Steve was singing barbershop. And he had early on asked me to come out and guest with his group one night. This was in Arlington Heights, and I did that. And when he did the follow-up and said, what do you think? And I said, Arlington Heights is too far to go. And which just said I had a limited thought of my limited ability to understand geography in Chicago. He came back about a year later and asked me again, and I said, no, it's too far. And he said, no, we're in a different group. We have a new group, and it's called the New Tradition, and it's in Northbrook. And I went to spend a night as a guest. And when I came back, Jan said, well, what did you think? I said, these people are trying so badly to become a national champion. And I said, I think that if the director had stood up there tonight and said, in order for us to qualify, you all have to go and lose 20 pounds apiece, they've all gone home and started on diets. It was just that much commitment. We had a wonderful time. I'm still singing with them, 30 some years later. We did get the national competition, and the first time we went, we placed fourth. That means they give you a medal. And 14 years later, we finally got one that was gold. And we got a medal every year, and we just would not quit. The last 8 medals before the gold were all silver. So we were a bridesmaid 8 straight years. And they were really into really good quality singing, having a good time. We certainly did that. But good quality singing. Barbershop music, it's an arranging style. At one time, people thought it was, songs that were written in the 20s and 30s. And that probably was true at some point. But you're working your chord structures in the arranging style where you are striking from 7th chord to 7th chord as often as you can. And when you sing 4 parts in a 7th chord and you use a common vowel that you can get precise about how you're singing it, and you're all in tune on your part, you get a harmonic. A 5th note appears, and no one is singing it. It's forced by the physics of the world and of sound. And so we defy geometry. The whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. And
that's called an overtone, right?
It's called an overtone, yes.
So
and you can also produce undertones which drop down below. It's usually not heard. Most people don't hear the overtones, but they can feel them. And the way you know it is you look out and your audience is sitting there either rubbing their forearms or the back of their neck because the hair is standing up on your arms. So you feel it.
It's really a spiritual moment, really, isn't it?
It certainly is an enjoyable one, I would tell you.
So the sound and the notes have to be aligned first.
Yes.
And when they're powerfully in sync, then this note above
Appears. Yes.
in
You
the
hear it, you feel it. Like I say, not everybody hears it, but you certainly feel it.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Can you tell us some of the adventures you've had, places you've been with both New Tradition and then with Bob Harris,
Yes.
the
Yeah,
choir
yeah.
director, music director at WCF?
Singing has taken us many, many places. The first contest we went to with the New Tradition was in San Antonio, but we have been in most of the major cities in the United States and Canada. Um, I have 19 medals. Every one the New Tradition qualified for, and we recently have sung in 3 or 4 where we didn't place in the top 5. So, and they became family vacations. My mother would come, Jan's folks would come, and that's how we've spent our vacations. That was a lot of it. Um, the New Tradition, we sang not only in the U.S., Canada in contests, but we sang in Killarney, which is a town in Ireland, and in the cathedral at Killarney. And we sang as part of a mass, and we were featured in it. So we sang a gospel piece, and we sang an old hymn, and we were up on the dais, and our director was standing out in the aisle, and Jan happened to be sitting on an aisle seat right next to where he was standing, and she kept saying, "Danny boy, sing Danny boy." We had sung it in contest and lost. Lost meaning we placed a second, but it had captured us, and because not only did we sing the song, we had it. The young son of one of our members acted it out on the stage, and it gave it an even higher dramatic. And if you know the lyric, the song is very powerful, especially if you have a Scotch or Irish background, and I do. And the kid was so good, we all learned to never watch him. If you watched him, you would choke up, no sound would come out, and you had to look away, take a breath, and get back in again. So that's what we did. We did sing it. We sang Danny Boy, and the priest said the mass has ended, go in peace. And we dispersed, and when I went out through a side exit, and here was a little Irish lady standing there. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, it was beautiful, And we said, "Well, thank you. We're so pleased we're here." And she looked at me and she said, "All those men crying, all those American men." We'd taken turns because we couldn't stop the sound. But that was great. We also sang in Brighton in England a couple of years later for their national convention. Also had the opportunity, one time we got an email. We were going to sing in Salt Lake. And the email said, if you hold a gold medal, which we did, the first 600 people who reply to this email can sing in a special service with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. You can't believe how fast I responded. So I've got to sing with them. 600 of us, 150 or close to 200 of them, which is a really marvelous sound.
And you had an experience with Bob Smith in New York.
Or Bob Harris. Yeah.
Bob Harris, I'm sorry.
Bob Harris, of course, became our choir director along the way. And Bob wrote some very nice stuff in addition to being an excellent musician and director. And he was invited to bring a choral group to New York City to sing in Lincoln Center. And he had a group on the Northwestern campus that was faculty and staff and some townspeople in Evanston. And one night in rehearsal, he said, we're doing this piece that I've written, and is there any of you who would like to come along to sing the Lincoln Center? Yes. And some of us did go, and it was great because that combined chorus had local people from Metropolitan New York, and the groups that came out of Chicago, and another group that also did an original piece that I think came out of Atlanta. And it's just marvelous. I mean, I like to sing, but I'm not a soloist. I'm not a concert singer, but I do love it. Uh,
Bob, as we come to a close, this has been great, by the way. Your life is filled with so much joy and growth and learning and connection with the Holy. Speaking of which, how would you define faith, the role of faith as it's
oh,
been present in your life?
faith
And
is what you believe even when you can't see it. Fortunately, if you're a musician, you can feel it. Um, and like I said, being in a little college town that was full of Presbyterian ministers, you got the opportunity to learn lots of lessons. But what I took away from all of it was that your faith allows you it tells you where you are on the playing field of life. Are you inbounds and out? Where are you on the field? Where's the goal line? And that's always been my guide. So yeah, I think that's my faith statement.
That's really powerful. What you said about music and faith just now reminds me of Augustine's quote, those who sing pray twice.
Yes, very
It's
much
like
so.
there's prayer. Prayer is wonderful, but when you put prayer to music, it's like praying twice.
That's great.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, can you still see me?
Yes, I can, Bob. Yes.
Good, because you've dropped off mine. I'm not sure why.
Okay, yeah, I can
I'm
see
still here.
you. And we are both being recorded. Well, I want to thank you, Bob, again for spending this time and helping us enrich our own spiritual lives as you presented your spiritual life and how it's connected with music, with God, with the church, with your family and loved ones. This has been a great time we spent together. Anything else you feel?
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to the people who went before, because it was the first one I saw was Junius, and I thought, I think I can do that, and maybe somebody might actually want to hear it. But to all the people who have followed have been an inspiration each on their own, and certainly get to know your congregational members a lot better.
Isn't it a blessing just to get to know each other a little bit
Absolutely.
deeper, right? And we can
One of the bad things about being in the choir loft is that you can see everybody, but you don't often get to stop and talk to people.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being willing to share, because that's what brings us closer together. So
thank you.
I wish you blessings and peace. And again, we give thanks for your offering today.
Thank you.